Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And today we're talking about Come and See. This film has a reputation. It's a Russian film from 1985, directed by Elem Klimov. It comes up with people online, things like that, war films, people always bring up Come and See, and they kind of bring it up in the way that to me always suggests that they haven't actually watched it, but they've just heard other people mention it. You know, so this kind of thing gets around that it is the greatest war film of all time, and in particular kind of has the greatest anti-war message of all time, and it's a very, very hard watch. But like I say, it always kind of seems to me that people say that in a way that suggests they haven't actually seen it. It's just part of this kind of cultural thing that it gets passed around and no one's actually sat down and watched it. We have now. It's interesting, actually, you posted on Facebook just before we watched the film, this is what we're watching tonight, and 7 or 8 people came out and said, oh, great film, wonderful film. I believe they've seen it.
Well, you know, I think one of the people has written a book about films of World War I, so
right.
I'm sure he saw lots of war films. But actually, it's not the kind of film that I would have expected many of my friends to see, though, you know, perhaps I'm wrong. I mean, some people in that post also said, oh, you know, I couldn't possibly watch it, you know. So Eastern European cinema and Russian cinema doesn't circulate very much. You know, there's Tarkovsky, and that's about it.
Yeah, there's like
Right.
2 or 3 big names, and Klimov is not one of them, really.
Well, he is in other circles. But all this to say that, you know, these films are difficult to see. You know, they're not part of the canon per se, which is very much orientated towards, you know, France, England, the US. And that's, you know, about it, to be honest. So, Japan. Yeah. So I'm not surprised that the film, people might not have seen it. You know, I certainly hadn't. You know.
Yeah, and to be fair, I'm talking completely out of prejudice. Maybe everyone online who says they've seen it has seen it. I just tend to think they're lying.
Yeah, you can usually tell.
Yeah, I think you maybe can. Anyway, the film is set in 1943 Belarus. At the time, Belarus was a Soviet Socialist Republic, and it was kind of the gateway through Poland to Russia. So it was important in Operation Barbarossa, which was the Nazi attempt to invade the Western Soviet Union to occupy Lebensraum, all of that kind of stuff. Because basically it sits east of Poland, north of Ukraine, west of Russia. It's the doorway to Russia. So Operation Barbarossa was 1941, and by this point the Nazis are occupying. And the film begins with a couple of kids on a beach playing. These are Belarusian kids. Well, they seem to be playing. They're also digging for rifles, right? So there's an old guy there who's telling him, don't dig, the Germans are going to see you. And you're kind of going, what's going on here? They are searching for rifles on the bodies of these German soldiers who've been killed by partisans, Belarusian partisans, freedom fighters, you know, resistance fighters. Once they've got a gun, the credits roll, it's like they can join the resistance, right? And as the film develops, it's possible to get into spoiler territory, and obviously we will, right? You follow this 14-year-old kid called Flyora, played by Alexei Kravchenko, who was a non-professional actor at the time. He was cast because, you know, they would be authentic and you'd be able to get these kind of realistic responses from him, all that kind of stuff. That was the idea. He became a professional actor subsequently.
He's very well cast.
Yeah, I agree. So he goes off to join the partisans, immediately loses them. They leave him behind, essentially being nice to him, even though he doesn't see it that way, when they go off on a mission, because he'll be immediately killed. The camp is attacked, he goes off to other places, meets up with other people, and you're taken on this ad hoc kind of road trip through Second World War Belarus, through all these villages that are being destroyed. And every time you get to something, when he goes back home, it's been destroyed. He doesn't quite realise that, but the girl he's with does.
Well,
Yeah.
because she sees it and he doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. He believes that his family has escaped and she has to kind of knock it into him.
Yeah. You've touched on the important things, which is that the film begins with these kids playing at war and seeing the glory and the romance of war. And then the whole of the rest of the film is about disillusioning them from that, you know, showing them and us all of the horrors of war.
Yeah, specifically him, because I think you only see that the other kid right at the start, don't you?
Yes.
And the film is a gradual descent into the worsening horrors of war. You know, so what I'm going to say is, like, when he gets back to his village, it has been destroyed, and as you go on to further villages, you have this knowledge that they are going to be destroyed. You know what I mean? And then you get to see it happen. So it's this kind of worsening thing where you see aftermath at first, and the aftermath gets worse. So the initial aftermath you see is of a burnt out village, and you get this one shot of the corpses that the kid doesn't see. And then you get to see the one survivor, who's that old man who's been burned horribly. So it's like you see the aftermath twice, and the second time it's worse. It's a really smooth kind of transition from innocence to experience, I suppose. You know, for you and for the character, as things get worse.
In my experience, and I'm not a big fan of war films, but this is certainly the film that most evokes the horrors of war. So kind of when our friends were saying, I couldn't possibly see that or whatever, I actually didn't find it difficult to see at all. I mean, I was shocked, and I responded, and but I always found it engaging and understandable, and I knew what was happening, and I wanted to find out more. I didn't find it unbearable, though maybe I should. But
no, I agree with you. I think, for one thing, we didn't see it in the cinema, so this isn't some re-release that we've seen. It's a restoration from 2017.
It's a beautiful restoration.
An incredible restoration. I never really thought I expected it to look as good as this. Yes. I suppose I expect it to look like near-realism or something. I expect it to look cheap. It really doesn't. It looks beautiful. The film kind of quality is beautiful, and the production design
colour is beautiful. This must have been a really expensive film to make, actually.
Yeah, it's very, very high quality kind of look all round. And I think visually, things get worse as the film goes on, so it's only by the end you see these real kind of, like, almost like, to some degree, like Hieronymus Bosch horrors, where the church is on fire and people have been forced in there, and it's disgusting. But what's really disgusting is the actions of the Nazis that have done that, So, like, the taking of the photo with the kid with the gun to his head as a photo opportunity. Like, that's disgusting, And I'm not saying that's more disgusting than putting people in a church and setting it on fire, but there's something especially sadistic about that. There are especially sadistic things that you see, but they do come towards the end. So I agree with you. I didn't feel shocked, appalled throughout most of the film. I felt maybe nervous about where things would go. But it wasn't hard to watch in that sense. You're watching it behind your fingers.
There are things about it that are so beautiful. All the scenes in the forest with the girl, with that green of the forest that they're in, with that kingfisher bird or whatever it is, the one with the yellow beak, the big.
Was it a heron?
Might be a heron. Those were all kind of very poetic and beautiful, and you think, oh, well, these are kids who are just going to get by, right? Like, and it reminded me in an odd way about John Boorman's Hype and Glory. Have you ever seen that?
No.
It's a film about kids, but set during the Blitz. And what you get is kids being kids. So even during the Blitz, they play. Kind of. They play games in all the bombed out shelters, and horrible stuff is happening around them, and they're being bombed and whatever. But to them, it's just a game, right? And there were certain scenes that I think, the film. So the scene at the beginning with the other boy when they're digging for the rifles. And then the scene with the girl in the forest, you think, it might be, that has a little bit of that. Yeah, that kind of, here are these two beautiful kids in this forest, and, but actually the film goes into much deeper and darker areas than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of thought, maybe initially I thought, this is going to be kind of trite with the kids, kind of growing up too quickly sort of thing. But, actually it really worked for me. I did wonder what it was going to do with the Nazis, because you were going to see the Nazis eventually, and you do. I wondered whether there would be, an equivalent 14-year-old kid on that side. You know what I mean? And there would be some equivalence drawn between, a lot of these are just kids too, but no, like, these Nazis are the worst of the worst. I think they're based on, what was that division of Nazis that was all criminals?
I don't know.
I forget the name of it, but it was like the most sadistic kind of thing, and it was like the Suicide Squad.
Although I'm not sure that it is. Because, you're basically told that they're not. Like, we're Germans, we're not like that. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, that's what they say once they've been
No, but you also
caught.
get a sense, like, from the officers that, it's not a particular gang. They are doing the most evil things, but they don't see themselves that way, right? And You don't get a sense that they're particular, that it's the criminal band of the Nazis. You just get the sense they are the Nazis.
I think that's true. When you meet them, I mean, I was going based on their actions and the glee with which they perform those actions, the glee they take in them, which you see when they're doing it. And I think you're right, though, when they're caught and they catch about 10 or 11 of them beneath that bridge, and the one in particular is, as you say, he's pleading with them, saying, this isn't who we are, we had orders and so on. But there's the younger guy, who was overseeing the trapping in the church, who says, no, this is us, you're a coward, tell them what I'm saying, you guys don't deserve to have a nation, and our mission will be complete, and so on. He's the one who really believes in it, and I think it's important that he's younger.
He's a little bit like that Nazi in Cabaret who sings Tomorrow Belongs to Me, right? Because, you see this beautiful boy, and he's blue-eyed and blonde, and like a little godling, and then he sings this song in this beautiful voice, and and the song has a particular melody, right? And then kind of it takes you a while to realize what horrible things he's saying, right? Like and I think there's almost, I'm not sure if it's a citation, but that particular Nazi is coded in the same way.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's more Aryan.
Yeah, the blonde hair, the blue eyes, he's beautiful, which the other ones aren't, right? So
what year was Cabaret?
72.
Because this began production in 77. And then, because of the fight to get past the censors and so on, it didn't get made for 8 years. And my understanding is that the censorship wasn't about the story, the content, or the messaging, as much as the aesthetics. Yeah. And because ultimately this film was made, as far as I'm aware, without compromise, without compromise to censorship, as far as the director wanted it, and he wrote it too, co-wrote it. So you get the sense that, like, it's not the messaging, right? The messaging is these people were the victims in this, and the Nazis are completely the aggressors. That's not a problem for, the state to promote. The problem would be the aesthetics, which ultimately they seem to have come round to.
I mean, there are some images that I'm sure I'll never forget in my life, really. The boy with the gun in his head, the girl from the beginning with her legs full of blood, as she appears. I mean, the interesting thing is that the film is filmed really lushly. The image is very dense and textured and colourful. I'm sure that, certain images would have been found offensive, for sure. And some of the scenes are absolutely harrowing. So, you mentioned, the Nazis at the end. But I thought one of the interesting things about the film is how you think they're a spectral presence initially, right? So they're dead. Or you see the planes overhead, which is like a recurrent motif, right? Then you begin to hear rustling sounds, then you see people kind of appear in the fog. Yeah, then you see formations, but actually you don't see any faces or any real people, right? Like, so for much of the film, maybe the first hour, they're almost spectral. Yeah, they're there, but really out of sight or barely seen or flitting by, right? And I thought that was like kind of really beautiful because, of course, in the last half of the film, they appear with all the Nazi-ness. Right?
It kind of made me think of, because I agree with you, I think it reminded me of Suspiria. In fact, the original Suspiria, which we watched recently, where we were talking about the fairy tale aspect to it. There's something fairy tale in the first half or so of this, I think, where, like you say, you have these kind of ghostly presences, I think, a part of it, and they're kind of walking around the woods, not kind of knowing what's there. It's kids, right?
And
there's
the
a Hansel and Gretel.
And the cauldrons and the
family. They go home and the cauldron's still hot. The stove, the pot on the stove is still warm. And there's like a Hansel and Gretel thing with the two kids, and they have an interesting little kind of slightly flirtatious relationship. There's some playfulness to it, but they're in this very dark world where danger kind of lurks. And there's something about it being seen through the eyes of children, that gradually falls away as the horrors become more and more real. And you get this repeated shot of the boy's face, and it's in close up, and it's kind of maybe not quite breaking the fourth wall, but he's certainly staring towards the camera, if not directly down the barrel.
I think at the end he stares directly at the camera.
Yeah, this is one I thought. Like throughout the rest of the film, I thought, they're staring just past the camera. That's what it felt like. But right at the end, it was really direct, wasn't it? But throughout, they are staring at least towards the camera, and the camera is face onto them, and they're in shallow focus. It's a portrait shot of them, and particularly of this boy most of the time. And you could just track the film by like how much dirt is on his face and scars and blood and the bags under his eyes and dust and his hair going grey. He ages, throughout the film, despite the fact he's still clearly 14 at the end, but he has miles on him by the end.
Yes. Initially, there are some scenes where he looks really beautiful. He's got beautiful skin and these rosy lips, right? And even though he's already had several adventures, there's kind of like a glow about him. But certainly, from the second half of the film onwards, his skin dries up. You see the bloodied lips that are chapped. Until the last final shot, it's kind of...
And it's a very evocative and very forceful image. It's staring you right in the face. Like I say, even if he's not quite staring you in the face, the image is. You're forced to confront the effects of all this pestilence on this young boy. Throughout. Straight, kind of face up. And most of the time the film isn't afraid to look at something, I suppose. Like when you see that the village has been burned, and then you see the old man seems to be the one survivor, and he's extremely badly burned. You might expect another film to turn away from it or something, but here he gets dialogue and the camera's close up on him and you see the extent of his scarring quite deeply. It's horrible to look at.
Yes. I mean, I think the most brutal things to see are people's glee at the suffering of others.
Yeah, in that scene in...
The one that you're describing is the Hieronymus Bosch scene.
Yeah.
Right, where all the Nazis turn up. And again, very similar to, what is said, happened with the Jews. They trick them into entering this building, right? They said, come with your papers and bring enough food for 2 days and whatever. And really, they're just going to kill them all, right? And that's kind of when the film unleashes itself, right? And you get like this incredible scene of gleeful violence, brutality, evil happening almost everywhere in the frame. Like, the image always has a focus, but there are always lots of things happening around it. Yeah, the dogs, the clown, the women, the pleasure in the violence. I think it's kind of, I'm almost like, just having trouble processing it, really. It was kind of so vivid and brutal, and in long takes, and with a kind of a moving camera often. So you get like the sweeping panorama of gleeful brutality, of a pleasure in the pain of others, which one kind of rarely sees in cinema except through cartoon villainy, yeah? Bop, 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 ha 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 ha. Yeah. But like, actually, you don't see the effects of the, of the brutality, whereas this one kind of shows it to you at all times.
Yeah, reminded me of Silo when you got to that scene. The glee and the sadism.
Yeah, that's interesting because, there's almost no sexuality in this, really.
No, you get the girl being dragged off, but you don't see anything. That's one of the times when the film doesn't choose to look. There's that, and I suppose you could say it doesn't choose to look at the inside of the church when it's burning either, which it could do.
Yes.
But it doesn't. It stays outside.
Yes. I think those are ethical decisions, really.
Yeah, probably.
No, they are. I mean, it would have been just too much to bear, really. And so, it's an unflinching look, but it's also a respectful look. Yeah, like, so you see all those men running after the girl who's thrown in the truck. Yeah, but, you don't see what happens in the truck. And I do think that's a choice and it's a decision. And
yeah, you see the aftermath. You see, you do meet her again, staggering back towards the village the morning after, her legs dripping with blood. But you don't see what happened in between.
Yeah.
What about the imagery that you see of real footage of starving people in corpses? I'm not sure exactly where that footage comes from, like if it's from Belarus, but it seems to be World War II footage.
It's World War II footage, and some of it is Auschwitz footage. I recognize it.
Right. And
my reading of it, though, as I said, I'm still processing, so I'm not going to put myself at the cross of this reading. But I think it wanted to make an analogy between what the Nazis did in the concentration camps and so on, and what they did in these 628 Belarusian villages. Which, they killed everybody, and they killed everybody in the most brutal way possible. That's...
Yeah. I suppose I was asking in the sense of it being ethical, the film hasn't shown us anything that was real footage up until now, or documentary footage, and now it chooses to just for a few seconds.
I think what I didn't like about that. So let me backtrack a little bit. I liked it, and I thought it was purposeful. It was trying to say this is part of World War II. Yeah. And there's the film is almost like backtracking as if, it would be possible to erase all of this, right? But I think what I don't like about the film is it has a kind of a great man theory of history or something, right? It's all Hitler's fault. And I think in doing so, it's a paradoxical thing because the Germans are shown in the worst light possible. I don't think, I've seen them depicted this bad, this evil, even in like Hollywood films or cheap Hollywood melodramas. But on the other hand, the film absolves the German nation by blaming it all on Hitler.
The original title of the film was Kill Hitler.
Right. Well, I think
Yeah.
World War II was about more than Hitler, and though the soldiers tried to blame it all on Hitler, the German soldiers, we were forced to do it, we were ordered to do it, right? Like a lot of the debates around the Nuremberg trial, this is my fault, I had to follow orders.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, the film on the one hand seems to be saying, but you did this, so you die. And on the other hand, it says it was all Hitler's fault at the end as well, which I didn't like, unless I'm misreading it somehow.
Well, I actually did feel the end was interesting, and it really surprised me when, so after these Germans have been shot by the villagers, the boy sees this portrait that we've seen a few times of Hitler, and it says Hitler the Liberator at the bottom. And he shoots it, and as he shoots it more and more, you see real footage of Hitler, and real footage of all things surrounding Hitler, real documentary footage, and they reverse. Buildings collapsing, they reverse, so they, like Tenet, they are restored to their original state, and it all speeds up and speeds up and speeds up, and the kid takes 4 or 5 shots, and it's all happening in this kind of cacophony of noise and image. And then you get to an image of baby Hitler on his mother's lap.
Yes.
And the kid doesn't shoot. And, I think you're meant to read that as the kid holding on to his humanity, I guess, realising that Hitler is a person. It was something that I found quite trite about it, though. And actually, maybe that's what I feared about them doing that with showing a 14-year-old Nazi boy, having the same kind of, in the same position as him. That actually felt... Cheap is not quite the right word, but it's a little simple. And the film has offered and invited kind of real complex emotional reactions to what you're seeing.
I think that image can be read more complexly as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, because everything backtracks, right? And you see him as a young man, you see him in different guises. And I don't know, the kid literally shoots at some of them. But then, when he's a baby, he stops shooting. He can't shoot a baby, right? And I think, you could read that in many ways. You can read it as, I won't shoot a baby, right? Whereas the Germans in this film have been shown killing babies throughout the film. And actually the fact that it's children, is underlined over and over and over again. But also it can be read as, this child is still to be made, right? Like, whatever turned this child into Hitler is not inevitable. I mean, a child is all potentiality and presumably can grow up in different ways, right? Unless you believe that, like, somebody's inherently evil and they're the devil and so on. But I wouldn't think that would be the case here because they're communists. So, they don't have that sense of God.
There's something trite about that too. Still, his crimes haven't been committed yet because he's still a baby. But I don't know that I wasn't that crazy about it. I did like that. Did like the scene up until then. I liked the sequence. I liked how you felt you're in this kid's head when this is happening, and every time he gets to an image of Hitler, he shoots at it.
Yeah,
and it's quite visceral.
You're in this kid's head throughout most of the film. I was really fascinated by the use of sound in that regard. Yeah, how he's shell-shocked, so, for entire sequences you don't hear, kind of what's happening except in this very muted way.
Yeah.
You hear the sounds of the forest. Yeah, it's all kind of, very subjective, and it's done through sound rather than point of view alone, yeah?
Yeah, well, with point of view, you're not entirely with him because there is that shot that we've pointed out where the girl sees the bodies in his village and he doesn't, and we see them. So there are times, at least, when we're given a perspective on things that he isn't.
Yes.
But for the most part, we are basically situated within his point of view. And you're right, the sound design is very powerful in doing that. Although, again, there's something interesting, right at the end when that Mozart comes in. That's not Mozart that this kid would ever have heard. Where's that coming from, and what's the purpose of it? It's very light. It's a very famous piece. There's something, because he goes off at that point to rejoin some more partisans who he spotted running through the woods, and we kind of go through the woods with him, and there's something light about it at that point, despite everything we've seen.
I didn't find it light. I found it religious. I mean, I don't know what the piece is, though. I recognize it, but I don't know what it's called.
Isn't it Lacrimosa? I think. Let me just quickly note that.
Well, Lacrimosa already doesn't sound light.
What does Lacrimosa mean in English? Requiem. It's a requiem, isn't it?
I think in Italian it means something to do with tears.
That's it, yeah. Lacrimosa, meaning Latin for weeping or tearful. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Quite right.
There are many scenes that fascinated me. So there are things that almost seep into your skin, right? Like, the scene where he travels through the bog to see if his mom and sisters have found refuge in the island. And he finds that, in fact, some villagers have, but not his own parents. And there was something about just using the butt of the gun to make their way through the bog, right? It's almost like you felt it, right? You felt the grit of the mud and the cold. And it goes on for quite a while. He shows you that, the struggle that is, to reunite what can no longer be reunited. So that really fascinated me. The other scene that fascinated me was when he and a band of people from 3 or 4 other men from the island go and try to get food because everyone is starving in the island. And in order to get food, they have to travel through this forest. But in the middle of the forest, there's this plain. There's this empty, deforested area where they're easy targets for German snipers, right? And there was something about the way that was shot, almost like gleeful or macho, or as they travel, and that scene lingers, for quite a while as well, right? Like they travel a bit, and and then all of a sudden, like all the snipers come in, and and then they stand up and continue, and they're laughing even, I think, as they do so, and then obviously one of them is hit and so on. But the duration of that scene, the way that it unfolds, the character's attitude to it, the fact that you don't see any German person, it's just, lights. I thought, I have to think about that some more. I thought it was like incredible.
Yeah, and there's I think there's a black comedy to some of it as well. They have to retreat, and there's something about the cow and trying to get the cow back. And then the cow dies, and it's like everything they do is just doomed in some way or another, and they're trying to get this cow across a field, and what are the odds? There's something darkly comic about that to me.
Well, I think the film is so great because it's darkly comic, it's moving, it makes you understand. After all the trouble that they've taken with the cow, right, and they're lacking everything, and there's that moment at the end where he just stabs into the cow, almost as if, eating a bit of the raw meat that she provides, You get the sense of need and frustration, and and on the other hand, as they're leaving with the cow, it is almost comic, right? And certainly you're made to see the beauty of the cow, and there's also, again, almost like a haptic thing, about the milking and the drinking of the milk. It's almost like you could feel their hunger, like kind of, they're saying, oh, this is like heaven, and it's almost like as if they haven't had any calories in their body for weeks or something, right? Like, the film is really wonderful at conveying all those bodily, needs,
And the film's definitely content to live in the absurd from right at the start, when you really don't know what's going on with the kids playing, and the kid, the one kid who's searching out the other kid, Flyora, is hiding. And the one kid searching out has, he affects this voice that is really not coming from his throat, is it? It's almost like an electronically modulated, like evil, deep voice that he puts on. And you hear their voices like this once or twice in the rest of the film. It's just something off about them. And when Flyora first meets the girl in the woods, and she's behaving in quite a weird way to him, from where he goes, you're crazy, you know. She's saying some odd stuff, and you get what is she doing? How is she teasing him? Does she mean what she's saying? There were some weird interactions between them. Was it putting like rose petals on his body?
Yes. I don't know. I thought all of that. I found all of that really both tender and youthful and exuberant. I mean, those scenes in the forest are what is lost by the war.
I think it's certainly true that no matter what you can imagine the kids will go through when you see them that early on, it's nothing compared to what you actually end up seeing them go through.
That's right.
It's really impossible to imagine the kind of... I think it's easy to kind of give people the wrong impression actually about the film, because we've already said that for a long time it's not full of this brutality.
No, and it's not unbearable.
No.
You know? Like I said, I'm still trying to process it. I think it's really beautiful. It's great filmmaking. You know, some of the shots are amazing because, I mean, they'll often begin by following 2 or 3 people, and then, you know, the camera goes on and on and on and on, right, following them, and then you'll get into this vista of war and people running through fields and dogs and tanks, and yeah, I mean, the direction of that must have been incredible. Just you know, the mechanics of it, you know, of getting these people moving in these particular ways, you know, so that they're in the frame and on camera. I found it really gobsmacking, actually. Wonderful. Well, you know, thank you for showing me this, actually. I don't think I would have without your suggestions, and I'm very, very glad I saw it. It's very interesting what comes your way and what doesn't, and, you know, people easily confuse what comes your way as what is, right? So I think it's great to discover, I mean, works, you know, staggering works like this, you know, that are not quite in your field of vision.
And I'm glad I watched it, because now whenever someone, you know, says online, oh, this is a great film, you say, have you seen it though? Have you actually seen it? I've seen it now. And I'm better than you.
You could ask them, what did you think of the use of the fog?
Yeah, exactly. That's what always used to get me, you know. When people at university would have conversations about The Godfather, and I'd be there trying to wing it, going, yeah, I've totally seen it.
And then someone would ask you, what did you think of the closing shot?
Yeah.
And you go, love it.
Exactly. It's that, or you just walk out of the room. I'm not having this conversation anymore.
All right, so shall we wrap up? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so highly recommended, and it is available. So do see it if you can. It's really a staggering work, and you know, very, very beautiful, very deeply moving, and I think kind of really complex in a very accessible way.
And I would say don't be turned off by that reputation that it has, because, you know, part of that reputation is that it's incredibly hard to watch. And it's not.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Oh, just incidentally as well, do you know where the title Come and See comes from?
Oh, well, no.
It comes from the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse.
Oh.
So there's the 7 seals on this scroll in Revelations that God has, I think, something like this, which is where the 7th seal comes from as well, Bergman. And as each one of the first 4 opens, a horse comes out, and it's like the colour is described, and like the weaponry or the people following it, and this they're variously interpreted as like war, pestilence, famine, death, and that's the first 4, and each one describes it, and it says "Come and see," invites you to see the apocalypse.
Ah.
Which is pretty bang on for the
Yes.
film. If they're not going to call it Kill Hitler.